The Ewen family emerged from the mists of time at Balvac, Monymusk, with Thomas Ewen, who was born in 1658. The early generations of the family were crofters and farm labourers, living permanently on the brink of starvation, and they were in receipt of poor relief from the church. It was not until the year 1800 that the family began to move away from Monymusk, some going to Aberdeen and some to the wool spinning mill at Garlogie, as a result of agricultural reform which forced the landless people into moving to the city or to emigrate. The map clearly shows that Ewen was an Aberdeenshire surname. Gordon Michie Ewen, with his wife and 5 young children, emigrated to Canada in 1855, sailing from Aberdeen on the barque Jane Boyd. One might have expected that for Gordon and his wife the passage across the Atlantic with 5 young children would have been very trying, but afterwards Gordon said that it was the most enjoyable thing he had ever done. The diary that he kept of his journey is published on the internet and in our family tree on tribal pages. In Canada, they were given free grant land about 100 miles north of the modern city of Toronto, where they had another 2 children. It is not known why he changed his name from Ewen to Ewing, but if he was illiterate, then the spelling of his name would have been determined by officials filling out paperwork. Alexander Ewen, born in 1826, was a cabin boy and a ship's carpenter on the Daphne, and he jumped ship when it was in South Australia in late 1841, when he was only 16 years old. Alexander married Mary Parsons in 1855, and together they raised 15 children at Victor Harbour, about 100 miles south of Adelaide. Alexander worked at the Bluff whaling station, and during off-seasons he worked as a carpenter. In 1871 he became the head man at the whaling station. There is a whaling museum in Victor Harbour, and Alexander and his family have a prominent place in the exhibits there. There are now 550 known descendants of Alexander and Mary Ewen. Alexander's son Frank married Edith Semmons, and together they raised 6 children. Here we see 4 of the children. Frank worked as a fisherman at Victor Harbour. Frank Ewen and his son Alan and his brother Bill. Frank Ewen's granddaughter Beverly with her husband Graham. On the right, I am with Beverly under the road sign for Ewen Terrace, named in memory of the Ewen pioneering whaling and fishing family. This is the site of Alexander Ewen's home in Victor Harbour, and it has been turned into a public park in memory of the pioneering Ewen family. Frank Ewen's grandson, Barry, trains pacers for Australian harness racing or trotting, which is like chariot racing. Here we see him on the right with his children, Simon and Scott, on the left. The northern Chinese people were known as the Boxers because of their martial arts skills. Worried by the expansion of foreign spheres of influence in China, they rebelled and destroyed foreign infrastructure. An 8-nation alliance eventually succeeded in quelling the uprising. The Australian warship HMAS Protector was short of 5 crew when it called at Adelaide on its way to join the Allied forces in China. 5 volunteers from Victor Harbour, including David Alexander Ewen, were recruited to restore the ship to full complement. The same David Alexander Ewen moved to Perth, and there is a Ewen Street in the Scarborough district named after him because of his work with the Surf Life Saving Club. Alexander Ewen, known in the family as Auld Heathery, was a shepherd who lived in a remote croft called Heathery Hoch, in the hills south of Strawn. He had 14 children, and it was a 2.5-mile walk to school using the road bridge across the Water of Dye. So they had a couple of planks to make a shortcut across the river, which reduced the journey down to only 1 mile. One rainy day, their 9th child, Sarah, then aged 8, fell off the plank bridge into the river and was drowned. My great-grandfather had a brother, William, who married the Gaelic-speaking Margaret Edward from Cockbridge in Upper Donside, and the family emigrated to West Australia in 1910. Here we have William and Margaret with 5 of their 6 children at Monymusk, Aberdeenshire. This is the farmhouse at Lomas, the home of William's son Charles, his wife Gladys, and their 9 children. In 2014, we toured West Australia in a camper van, and Marie Ewen and her brother Gary took us to see the remains of Charles's farm at Lomas. The people in the picture are Marie, Gary and Kate. In 1990, Murray Ewen's wife Nancy, she is the great-granddaughter-in-law of William Ewen, the original emigrant, came to Scotland on her own with 2 young children. It coincided with a Ewen family gathering, so she joined us in Braemar. This is a gathering of some of the West Australian Ewens, 3 siblings, Marie, Wayne and Graham's wife Glenda, and a pair of siblings, Lindsay and Murray Ewen, along with their first cousin, Glenda Mayer. At Murray's home in Perth, when we visited in 2014, he has since retired to Margaret River. Marie's brother Gary is an agronomist, and this is his son Jaden's store in Wickepin. This is the pair of them, Gary and Jaden. Marie's brother Wayne, known as Woggy, has the Toyota franchise in Narrogin. This diagram shows the immediate family group with the Ewens of Alness and the Bates family on the left. In the centre is our group of the Ewens. On the right are the Archibald, Carr and McSween families. Alexander Hutchin Ewen had another son, James Ritchie Ewen, born in 1853, who was an estate worker at Belechin near Aberfeldy, and in later life moved to Ardguy in the Kyles of Sutherland. His son Charles Reid Ewen moved to Alness, where he married his landlady's daughter. He was a lorry driver and wood contractor. Charles Reid Ewen had a son, Farquhar McRae Ewen, who lived in Alness, and he met William Joyce, aka Lord Haw Haw, at Gledfield House, Ardguy, in 1938, and got a present of 1 penny from him for his 10th birthday. Lord Haw Haw was the last person hanged for treason in Great Britain. Farquhar gave the penny to his mother and forgot all about it. When going through his mother's things after she died, he found the envelope shown in the picture. Charles Reid Ewen had a brother, Innes Ewen, born in 1895, who had the grocer's shop at Grantully. My grandfather's sister Elizabeth married William Watt in 1903 and the family lived at the Little Fornet, a croft near Kirkton of Skene. They had 8 children, and eventually there were only 3 siblings left at home, including Kate, who ran the house with a rod of iron. William slept in the stick shed and was tolerated in the house to eat. Their granddaughter Gladys married into the Youngson family, who ran a large farm at nearby Ochrony. My elder brother Graham taught at Tertowie Outdoor Centre when he started teaching, and regularly took parties of children to visit the farm at Ochrony. My grandfather had another sister, Margaret, who in 1919 married a publican, Thomas Bates, from Reading. Thomas and his family came to stay with the Watt family at the Little Fornet every year for their summer holiday. Here we see him with his 3 sons, one of whom, Ronald, is Simon Bates' father. Ronald lived in Southampton and worked as a stock controller before moving to Jamestown, Strathpeffer, when he retired. This is Thomas Bates, the publican. And this is his pub, the Carpenter's Arms. On the left is Ronald Bates' wife, Olga Lily Brent. On the right is Simon Bates and Kathleen Watt of the Little Fornet. Here we have Margaret Ewen, who is Thomas Bates' wife, with her brother Francis and her sister Agnes, and her children Stuart and Ronald. This is Carol and Simon on the day of their wedding. They stayed in the Kintail Lodge Hotel at the head of Loch Duich and took a boat down to Eilean Castle to be married in 1994. When Simon's dad died, they retired and moved into his house in Jamestown, where they stayed for a short time, before knocking it down and building Miltoga II. The first known Ewan was Thomas, born in 1658, and the family lived in the immediate vicinity of Monymusk village for 200 years before Alexander Hutchin Ewan moved into Aberdeen. These Ewans were variously weavers, small farmers, foresters, and paupers, receiving poor relief from the church. However, Alexander's son, also Alexander, moved back to the countryside, living variously at Monymusk, Keith Hall, Kintore and Ballater, where he worked as a woodcutter and small farmer. Alexander's first child was born at Gownieburn, near Torfins. And his second child was born at Dunswell, also near Torfins. In 1881, Alexander moved to Pitmuni at Monymusk, where the remainder of his 9 children were born. Alexander Jr.'s son, James Stuart Ewan, was my grandfather, and he progressed to become contractor's manager for John Milne and Company, who moved goods on by horse and cart from the railhead at Ballater. His name is on many of the cups at the Ballater Flower Show, and he was also an expert draughts player, and in retirement he spent all day in the summer on the draughts board on the village square. One day he arrived home fuming silently, and it took some time to prise out of him what the reason was. Eventually he admitted that he had been beaten at draughts, and by a common tourist at that. Eventually it transpired that a return match had been arranged for the evening, and come nightfall James was smiling, and all was well with the world again. My grandmother, Margaret Thompson of Migvie, in the door of Lindeen Cottage, Ballater, the family home. With her are my father William, and my aunt Margaret, and Margaret's husband Lechmere Dinnis, who was known as Lef. This is the only known photo of Margaret Thompson. On the right are 4 generations of the Dinas family. My great-grandfather, Alexander Ewen, my grandfather, James Stewart Ewen, my aunt Margaret Ewen, and my cousin Stuart Dinas, at the door of Lindeen Cottage, Ballater. My father, William, left Ballater School as its Ducks and went on to study at Robert Gordon's College and Aberdeen University. He was a keen sportsman, playing cricket for Moultrie Cricket Club in Ballater and cricket and hockey for Gordonians in Aberdeen. On the left, we have William cutting steps on the ladder on Loch Nagar. On the right, we have William, the pioneer climber who helped to revive the sport after World War I, and he put up several new routes on Loch Nagar. A.W. Clarke was obviously a very keen reader to have carried that book up to the Sluggan hut. William and his wife Louisa were also keen skiers, and Louisa claimed that her introduction to skiing was to carry her skis to the summit of Loch Nagar and ski back down again. This is my parents' home at 242 Midstocket Road, Aberdeen, photographed about 1949, just after World War II. The Scaffy's cart is just about to pass the house, and the vacant building plot was our childhood playground, known as the Patch. Note the black and white rings on the lamppost, a legacy of the blackout in World War II. Me and my siblings in the garden of the family home at 242 Midstocket Road. On the left, the Ewen family were on holiday in Ballater, where Dad had an arrangement with Jock Robertson, the keeper in Glenmick, that it was okay to fish the river as long as he didn't see him. Me and my brothers off to school in 1950. William Ewen, born in 1764, had a son called Charles, born in 1790, and his 6 times great-grandson is the well-known tennis player Andy Murray. He was one of the sport's premier players during the 2010s, winning 3 Grand Slam titles and 2 men's singles Olympic gold medals. In 2015, Andy Murray married Kim Sears, and they have 4 children. Alexander Hutchin Ewen had 11 children, and 2 of them, David and Innes, worked together as woodcutters. David took the contracts, and they moved their portable log cabin, called Monymusk Cottage, to the site of the next job. David, his wife Maggie, their 12 children, and Innes, who was single, all lived in the log cabin. That is, 15 people living in what I presume was a 2-room cabin. When David retired, he moved to a stone cottage in Bankery High Street, which he also called Monymusk Cottage. In 1954, the Bankery football team had 6 Ewens, all the descendants of David Ewen and Maggie Burse. My great-grandfather Alexander married Isabel Cooper from Kincardine O'Neill, and the family lived variously at Monymusk, Keith Hall, Kintore and Ballater, raising 9 children. The earliest known Cooper lived at Cobblehoch Bankery. My great-grandmother had a sister, Jane, who married Andrew Clarke from Inverbervie, where the couple lived for a short time before emigrating to Australia. My great-grandmother, Isabel Cooper's parents, Alexander Cooper and Margaret Booth, and their granddaughter, Anne Clarke, born in 1887. On the right is Jane Cooper, born 1859, and 2 of her 4 daughters. My father's 3rd cousin, Norman Cooper, and his wife Thelma, lived directly across the road from my grandparents' house in Ballater. Norman and Thelma have 12 grandchildren. There is a small branch of the Cooper family at Northam in West Australia. This is Neil Cooper, born in 1901, who emigrated to Northam in West Australia in 1923. And this is his granddaughter, Julie Cooper, who lives at Wongan Hills in West Australia, with her daughter, Alexia, who was born in 1981. My grandfather, James Ewen, married Margaret Thompson from Migvie. The Thompsons were farmers and blacksmiths at the Glac of Migvie, which lies in the hills west of Tarland. This is a map of the places in Cromarr that have at one time been occupied by a member of the Thompson family. William Thompson, born in 1839, married into the Fowler family, who were carters and fared very well from the construction of the Deeside railway line, owning property in both Tarland and Ballater. My father was born here in Fowler's Buildings, Ballater. Mary Kennedy was my father's second cousin, and her parents farmed at Lochmance, Cool, and retired to Daisybank Cottage in Braemar. Their two daughters continued to live in Daisybank after their parents died, and did not improve or change the cottage in any way. Just before Mary died, the cottage was designated as a listed building, as it still had the box bed and cast iron range in the living room, amongst other traditional features. William Anderson, born in 1892, was in charge of the Braemar depot of John Milne and Company, who moved goods on by horse and cart from the railhead at Ballater. William was the first cousin of my grandfather's wife, Margaret Jaffrey Thompson. William lived in Castleton Terrace, Braemar. I discovered a tenuous family connection to the tenants of Gleneye shortly after my brother Graham died, which was sad because he had spent much of his retirement researching the history of Gleneye without knowing of his connection to it. The clan Lamont, from time immemorial, had occupied the land here, and from 1800 Donald Lamont was the tenant of Dalnafay Farm until the glen was cleared of people in 1842, at which time his son Robert was 2 years old. Robert went on to marry my grandmother's first cousin, Catherine Thompson, thereby creating the link between our two families. While Donald was being evicted from Gleneye, his first cousin, John Lamont, had become the Professor of Astronomy at Munich University and Astronomer Royal of Bavaria. Quite a difference in the fortunes of the two cousins. In 1934, the Deeside Field Club erected a memorial to John Lamont in the village of Inverrye. My father married Louisa Watt Archibald in Aberdeen in 1938. The earliest known member of the Archibald family lived in Tuch, a hamlet at the east end of the Vale of Afford, and the family remained there for 4 generations. One of their crofts was Culthibert, which lay at 900 feet above sea level, and was the last croft at the top of the hill, at the edge of the moor. The chart shows that the Archibald name was common across the central belt of Scotland and up the east coast, centred on the Edinburgh area. My great-grandfather, John Smith Maitland Archibald, was born at Lumphanan in 1845, and his first child was born at Dess, which is just west of Kincardine O'Neill. His other 6 children were all born at Crofts of Dalwhing, a Boyne, which was near to the Bridge of S. John Smith Maitland Archibald with his horse and his nicky-tams. Nicky-tams are the string ties just below his knees. He retired to a thatched croft house at Wood End, Cushney, no trace of which remains. At the time that John was living here, the tree-covered area behind would have been open moorland. The road climbing up past the croft was known locally as Auld John's Brae. My grandparents, William and Louisa, at Wood End Croft, Cushney, to visit William's parents, John Smith Maitland Archibald and his wife Helen Clark. Note Grandpa's motorbike and sidecar on the right edge. My grandmother, Louisa Howie Watt, was born out of wedlock to Alexander Watt and Jane Howie. As soon as the pregnancy was discovered, Alexander Watt took a train across Europe to catch a boat at Brindisi in Italy, which had left London a week earlier bound for Australia. Jane Howie stayed in Aberdeen until Louisa was born, and then handed Louisa over to be brought up by a family called the Faulkners, before she too went to Australia. There was no subsequent contact between the pair in Australia and the families that they left behind in Scotland. Thanks to genealogy websites, it was subsequently discovered that Alexander Watt and the scandalous Jane Howie married in Melbourne, Australia, and had a further 3 children. So my grandmother had 2 full sisters and a full brother that she never knew existed. My mother and grandparents bowling in a Boyne on the green at the Victory Hall, where they were friends with the caretaker. My grandparents and their children, Thomas, Margaret and Louisa, on a visit to Cushney. They had a 4th child, William, who died of tuberculosis at the age of 27. My grandparents were great friends with the Emsley family on the nearby Balnakelly farm, and the Ellis family on Lone End Farm, and they remained friends all of their lives. I think that this is at Balnakelly Farm. My mother as a young woman. While at college, my mother spent her summer holidays playing tennis, becoming the ladies' singles tennis champion of Aberdeen. Both my parents were very self-effacing, and I only discovered about the tennis after she had died, when I found this newspaper clipping. Louisa first went walking with the Hill Walking Club at the Teachers' Training College, and when she left college, she joined the Cairngorm Club. There she met my father again, and romance blossomed. Here I am with my Archibald grandparents and my Uncle Tom and his wife Anne, and their children Anne and Jennifer, and my sister Kathleen. My great-grandfather, John Smith Maitland Archibald, had a brother James, born in 1838, whose great-granddaughter, Caroline Taylor, moved to the Paisley area. Caroline's daughter, Joan Collins, married into the Monymusk family, and Joan's daughter, Nicola, was Miss Scotland in 2010. In June 2012, Nicola married the former Rangers player, Kyle Lafferty, and they had a son, Taylor Lafferty. They later divorced. My grandfather had a brother, Thomas Clark Archibald, who emigrated to New Zealand. Thomas Clark Archibald is in the centre of the picture, which was taken in Scotland. This is a picture that Thomas Clark Archibald sent home to his parents. Thomas Clark Archibald married Ellen Barnes in 1918, and they had 7 children. These are the oldest 2 of them. This is Thomas Clark Archibald and Ellen Barnes with their 7 children. Their second child, Hazel, married George Musgrove, and they were Glenys Macmillan's parents. Their 4th child, Shirley, married David Doak, and they were the parents of Janice Doak, who came with Glenys to Scotland in 1970. In 1977, Glenys's parents came to visit her in Kintail. In October 2012, Dolan and Glenys Macmillan celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Everybody to the right of Dolan, the tall guy left of centre, are his children and grandchildren, and everybody to the left are assorted other relatives. Dolan and Glenys lived in Kintail, but Dolan's ancestors came from Easter Ross. They were in the parish of Kincardine on the south side of the Dornoch Firth, with John Ross, born 1806, living in Glencalvy, near Croich, when the glen was cleared of people in 1845. On the 24th of May 1845, 90 people in 18 family groups were evicted by force from nearby Glen Calvé, and while the men folk searched for an alternative place to live, the women and children were allowed to shelter in Croich churchyard. Some scratched messages on the church windows. Including Dolan's great-great-grandfather, who wrote, "John Ross, Shepherd, Parish of Ardguy." The women milked cows in a nearby field to provide milk for the infants, and borrowed a flask from the church to feed them. These infants included Dolan's great-grandmother, Christina Ross, who was then aged 4 years. Later, the church was locked, and they were unable to return the flask, which was retained by John Ross's family and survived the decades in a wall cupboard that had been plastered over. In 2017, the flask was donated by Dolan to the museum in Inverness. Here we see Dolan's great-grandparents and grandparents. The chart shows that the Howie surname was common across the central belt of Scotland and up the east coast, centred on the Glasgow and Ayrshire areas. The Howie family had been in Aberdeen for 2 generations before my great-grandmother, the scandalous Jane Howie, was born in 1862. The Howie family originated at Fordyce in northwest Aberdeenshire. This is the village of Fordyce, which had a castle and 3 schools. It was a centre of excellence for education in the early 1900s, as the landowner paid the teacher's salary. This is the picturesque village of Fordyce. And this is Fordyce Castle, built in 1592 by Thomas Menzies, the Laird of Durn, and one-time Provost of Aberdeen. The Mill of Forg is situated on the Burn of Forg, a tributary of the River Devon. James Howie, born in 1756, was the miller at the Mill of Forg around the year 1800. And in 1820 he is recorded as being the miller at the Mill of Garrisford, near to Auchterless. In the early 1800s, the family started to move about, with several of them landing up in Aberdeen, where they all lived in the Skene Square area next to Broadford Mills. One exception was Robert Howie, born in 1801, who went to Jarrow, on Tyneside, where he was described as an iron ship-building labourer. Before 1824, 3 brothers of the Howie family, William, Sidney and Norman, emigrated to South Africa to find work, and from there the family moved on to Rhodesia, Australia and the United States. So the Howie family is now spread all around the world. However, they all keep in touch with each other, and once I had found one of them on a genealogy website, I was soon speaking to them all. Here we see William Howie, born in 1892, who, before he emigrated, was an upholsterer working in Aberdeen. If you were a South African Howie, then you either played the pipes or you were a Scottish country dancer. When William married Flora Pippin, the Pretoria Pipe Band was 1 piper short of its normal head count. Avril O'Leary, herself a Scottish dance champion and referee, came across to the Cowell Highland Gathering in Dunoon every year so that her daughters Kaylee and Gillian could compete in the World Scottish Highland Dance Championships. Alexander died in France in World War I at the age of 28. Kathleen Hegwood, or Huntley, lives in the west of the USA, in the Idaho Panhandle. She is a published author and has written a superb account of the life of Flora MacDonald called Miss Niach. Beverly Alison Howie moved to Pretoria when she was 6 years old and to Brisbane at the age of 37. The scandalous Jane had a brother Alexander, born in 1866, whose son Norman emigrated to Pretoria in South Africa. Norman's granddaughter, Lindy Barbara Rose, married Wilfred Mole of Sandstone Heritage Park, a massive agricultural and heritage estate. Sandstone Estate has the largest collection of narrow-gauge railways in the world. It also has a large collection of vintage cars and aeroplanes. The scandalous Jane's brother Alexander had another son, Sydney, who moved to Sydney, Australia. In July 1942, Rommel took 30,000 prisoners at Tobruk when the Allies surrendered. Sydney was the oldest person who managed to escape and received the personal message from Churchill, which simply said, "Stout effort." Kathleen Huntley visiting the Australian Howies. Alexander Watt was a shoemaker born in Lawrencekirk in 1858, and he moved to Aberdeen. There he met Jane Howie, born in 1862, and I have already told the story of how he fled to Australia after making Jane Howie pregnant, and that she followed him and they married in Australia. The village where Alexander Watt was born in 1858. This is the family of my great-grandparents, Alexander Watt and the scandalous Jane, that they had in Australia after they had left my grandmother behind in Aberdeen. This is my great-grandparents, Alexander Watt and the scandalous Jane's home in Melbourne. Alexander was a shoemaker and invested money very advantageously in Broken Hill. This is Alexander Watt's last will and testament, showing the names of his 3 Australian-born children, Margaret, Ethel and Alexander. This is Ethel with her husband, Ernest Tippett, and her son, Joseph. Jennifer and Meris are 2 great-granddaughters of Alexander Watt and the scandalous Jane. Jane is the great-great-granddaughter of the scandalous Jane, and Hannah is her great-great-great-granddaughter.
Oh, tell me if it was on your road, the roaring northern wind, as ye come blowing frae the land that's never frae my mind. My feet they travel England, but I'm deeing for the north. My man, I saw the siller tides run up the Firth o' Forth. I wend a ken am wheeling you and find they fall and rise, and fain I'd feel the creeping mist on yonder shore that lies. But tell me as ye passed them by, if it saw ye on the way, my man a rocked the roving gulls that sail a ben the tay. But saw ye Nathan Lee and wind afore ye come to Fife? For there's muckle lying yon to take that's mair to me nor life. My man a swept the Angus braes that ye havena trod for years. Oh, and forgie a hameless loon that canna see for tears. and far up in the Angus straths I saw the wild geese flee, a lang, lang skein of beaten wings with their heads toward the sea. And I their crying voices trailed a hint among the air. O wind, hae mercy, had ye wished for a darna listen mair.
You ripple through my mind like the movement of sun and tide, memories unfolding ridge by ridge and falling into the sands of time. It seems like yesterday, you and I on Sandwood Bay, holding your hand in mine, walking over the sands of time. You ripple through my mind like the movement of sun and tide, memories unfolding ridge by ridge and falling into the sands of time. Watched as you sailed away, all alone on Sandwood Bay.